So thank you so much. It's so nice to see everybody. The topic is justice, and what we're going to do, I hope, in the time that we have together, is explore the complexity of what justice looks like, and maybe challenge notions of what justice should look like from an old world order perspective. So I know that the theme for this conference is rethinking success. And so to the degree to which achieving justice is one measure of success, we want to rethink it and look at the complexity of it that is offered in the Baha'i writings. There are a few disclaimers that I want to give first. One has to do with the fact that this will be very Baha'i writings focused. Some people may be Baha'is, some people may not be Baha'is, but the concept of justice that I'm grappling with and digesting and trying to understand is coming directly from the Baha'i writings. It's not unique to the Baha'i faith. There are similar pieces of these concepts in all of major faiths, but the Baha'i faith aggregates it in a pretty unique way. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. And I say that because if I'm using lingo or phrases that are confusing, just absolutely, like, I don't know, do this or something to your screen so I can actually see. Yeah. And because I don't see like the fingers. Some people have tried to do this and I'm like, I can't see that. So do something pretty obvious. I can see, I think we have few enough people that I can actually see everybody, but just don't hesitate to interrupt. I also have a problem, which is that sometimes I'll use like legalese or I might say things that nobody but me understands. So feel free to like stop me, whether it's related to the Baha'i faith or something else. The other thing that I will say as a disclaimer and related to that is that the Baha'i faith has no clergy. And so implicit in that is my inadequacy in talking about this. So I read the Baha'i writings like every other Baha'i, and I'm trying to figure it out. There's some stuff in here that I actually really don't think I still don't understand. And then there's some other stuff I think I figured out, but I could also be wrong about it. So that's all to say that, take what I say with some grain of salt. Feel free to, read the same writings on your own, have different interpretations, that kind of thing. So for me, the grappling with the concept of justice has been in two big spheres. One has to do, and it all relates to the Tahirih Justice Center. One sphere is our external work, and it's the achievement of justice for our clients, and I'll talk about that. The other has to do with the internal sphere, and that has to do with organizational management. And well-managed organizations engage in justice internally so that people can trust. They feel that the information they're getting is transparent, is clear, that there's cause and effect, punishment, reward, consequences for doing well, and it's a form of justice as well from an internal management perspective. So we've grappled with both of those, and I'll share a little bit more about that. In the question discussion section, I'll go ahead and preview because you might want to begin thinking now. We will further talk about the application of this concept of justice in three areas. Society, our like big institutions, laws, that kind of thing, but also community in a very localized sense, and then us as individuals as we relate to one another. And so we'll be having some of those application conversations in the breakout group. So to frame the application grappling with concept of justice, I should explain the 101 of what the Tahirih Justice Center does, so that makes some sense. The Tahirih Justice Center is a nonprofit organization. We're in the United States. We have 5 offices around the country. In Washington, D.C. area, San Francisco, Houston, Texas, Atlanta, and Baltimore. So the Tahirih Justice Center has over 100 full-time paid staff. Most of our staff are attorneys. And then we also have social workers on staff, and then other staff to run, and finance staff, development staff, things like that. And our mission is to provide free legal assistance for women and girls who are fleeing human rights abuses. So our clients are fleeing things like female genital mutilation, human trafficking, domestic violence, honor crimes, child marriage, rape in the context of war, gang violence, these kinds of things. We focus exclusively on immigrant and refugee women. Part of our mission is, well, a lot of our mission is informed by a US legal paradigm, which is very unfortunate. And the paradigm is essentially that you don't have a right to a lawyer, but you must have one to win your case in court. And then there's a spectrum of good and bad lawyers. And so in order to win, you have to have a good lawyer, and that's very expensive. So there's a justice system in the United States that directly correlates having money and the ability to hire a good lawyer with your ability to achieve justice, which should be a human right. And so we focus specifically on immigrant and refugee women because they are the ones with the least access to institutionally state-funded legal aid and that kind of thing. And we try to support, like reduce the disparity by providing free legal defense for women and girls. And it's very important because without a lawyer, the statistic is that you only have a 16% chance of winning your asylum case, for example. With any lawyer, your chance jumps to 33%. And then the Tahirih Justice Center has a 97% success rate. And so it's a very unfortunate thing because it's like winning the lottery if you can access free legal services, and it's just entirely inequitable. So this is the justice system that we're operating in. Justice has largely been defined by legal aid organizations as the punishment. So justice is, it's like you've achieved justice when you've achieved punishment. And the Baha'i faith takes a very different view to justice. And we try to implement that different view at the Tahirih Justice Center. There is a quotation that informs this work, which is, "The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men." This is from Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. In English, this word appearance has two very different meanings, and the difference is important. One meaning is like in appearance only. So it can mean almost pretending or a facade or a fake appearance. The other definition is the gradual appearance of something, the emergence of something. It's not fake, it's more gradual, it has to be created and it emerges. I asked someone who speaks the language in which this was written what that word meant because of this translation issue in English, and was told that it's the same word that's used to describe the rising of the sun in the morning. So this is a very important distinction because, particularly as a social justice advocate, it gives me a lot of inspiration to know that what this is referring to is that justice is essentially a prerequisite to our being able to see unity, to have unity appear. So it's not just about looking like there's unity, it's about the actual emergence of, or the actual creation of unity. So if we know that unity is the whole deal, like it's the whole purpose, it's the reason justice exists, then the process, the arc that we're engaged in, unity has to be the endpoint. Punishment may be a part of the process, but it's not the endpoint. We're not done with justice when we have a moment of punishment. There's this whole process of justice that, according to this quote, results in the appearance of unity. So we have to have a longer mindset. One of the ways we try to implement that is by recognizing that justice isn't found only in the courtroom. And so we have social workers who work with all of our clients on helping rebuild their lives and helping them find dignity, helping them, if they want, to restore and to reconcile with their abuser, to confront them. There's a whole movement in the United States, and I don't know enough to know if this is also global. It's called restorative justice. And it is this idea that punishment's a part of the process, but it's not the end of the story. And that there's a restorative element that both has to do with the well-being spiritually of the perpetrator, who should own up, hear the impact of what they've done on the person they've afflicted, maybe ask for forgiveness, apologize. These are all very personal things, right? But that could be a part of the process. And then on the other end, to forgive, to receive, to feel free of the burden of the anger and the resentment and the hurt, and then ultimately to have unity, because that's, you know, the goal. That's ultimately the goal. So we take a view of justice that is different. And I will say, by the way, the Tahirih Justice Center is an overtly Baha'i-inspired organization. That doesn't mean anything other than the fact that we're transparent about where our values come from, and we're intentional and overt about applying those particular values. So, you know, there's no formula that I'm aware of. There's no playbook for being a Baha'i-inspired organization. We're all just trying to figure it out. So there's no one right way. But for us, what that has meant is that we are both very transparent, and this is important for our hiring process. We don't want anyone to be surprised that we're going to be reading Baha'i writings in order to ground ourselves in values, to understand how to apply them, that kind of thing. And then when people join the organization, we have a 2-day orientation process that aligns people on our values, how to implement them, and that kind of thing. But 95% of Tahirih staff are not Baha'is. The majority of our board are not Baha'is. We hire people who are qualified and who are values aligned. And just given the volume of our staff and the market of Baha'is, we have very few Baha'is who are actually at Tahirih, but that doesn't matter. I dare say some of the best applicants of Baha'i principles are not actually Baha'is. And so it's a neat process to watch, but we're very overt about our intentionality around applying these principles. So another one of my favorite quotes that I think helps frame this paradigm of justice in the Baha'i faith is a quotation that says, "Love is a light that never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear." So if unity is the goal, there's got to be love a part of that, right? Like, it's hard to be unified authentically anyway, in a way that's deep and meaningful and gets us through life's tribulations and tests and helps us solve problems together without that unconditional love. And so we're told that love is a light that never, I mean, this is a really harsh quote actually, that never dwelleth in a heart possessed by fear. Now, you can have injustice against you and have your heart not possessed by fear. It's actually possible to do that. But for a lot of mere mortals, it sure is a lot easier to not live in fear when you're not facing violence, when you're not facing oppression, when you're not facing injustice. So it's not a prerequisite, like to not face injustice or to only perfectly experience justice isn't a prerequisite to unity, but it sure makes it easier. And so, you know, and we can see with Tahirih Justice Center's clients, in that moment when their fear is released, and sometimes it's released because they know they've got a lawyer, they've got someone in their corner. Now they know they've got a police officer who is on their case, a prosecutor who's doing a really good job, a system that's working for them. You know, there are lots of reasons why someone might be able to not be possessed by no matter what stage of the justice process that they're in. But, you know, so we all have different ways and reasons to stay not possessed by fear, even when we're faced with coronavirus or injustices or attacks from people or whatever it may be. But it is a lot easier if there is a system of justice implemented. And of course, we know wonderful examples. Martin Luther King was an incredible example of an individual who faced incredible risk every day, violence, and did not allow his heart to be possessed by fear, and was still able to love unconditionally, even when faced. In the Baha'i faith, Abdul Baha the son of Baha'u'llah, just has incredible examples, superhuman examples of being faced with incredible injustice, even by his own family, but never estranged himself, didn't give them a chance to ask for forgiveness. As some of you may know, that Abdu'l-Baha was poisoned. There was an attempted poison by an individual who had allied himself with some half-brothers of Abdu'l-Baha. This person then came to him and said, like, and I'm paraphrasing it in a horrible way, but he was like, I'm so sorry. You know, I shouldn't have tried to poison you. Will you forgive me? I want to come back into the fold. And Abdu'l-Baha immediately said, yes, I forgive you. And, you know, you're welcome back. And then he tried to poison him again, kind of went back over with his half-brothers, and then came back again and asked for forgiveness, and Abdu'l-Baha unequivocally gave it. And people around him were saying, boundaries, like this could kill you. This guy is actually trying to kill you. And Abdu'l-Baha said, you know, he followed this approach of absolute unconditional love and forgiving 100,000 times. It's really hard. I have not achieved that. I won't pretend to have achieved that. And I won't pretend that it's easy, but I'm also not going to sugarcoat the standard. It doesn't change the standard that we're held to, even if we can all admit that it's super hard and we might spend our whole lives trying to achieve that standard of both the implementation of justice and implementation of forgiveness. And so now I want to get into the nuts and bolts of this concept of justice. We are told, and I'm actually at this point going to share my screen. So this is a quotation just that lays out basically what we're going to talk about now, which is that the Baha'i faith draws a very definite distinction between the duty of an individual to forgive, even to be killed rather than to kill, and the duty of society to uphold justice. So this is the magic sauce. This is a summary of the Baha'i concept of justice. It's not everybody's job. And in particular, it is not the victim's job. The victim plays a role, and we'll talk about that. But the ownership of justice has to be, the burden of that has to be on society. Okay, so to dive into the details of that, let's talk about the importance of justice, the importance of forgiveness, and then we'll put it all together in an example that Abdu'l-Baha gives, try to figure out how it works at the same time. Because the whole Baha'i faith is a faith of complexity. And I think too often, well, we're simple people, we're simple creatures. Humans love sound bites. We love memes. We like things to be really, really simple. And I'll go ahead and lay it up front that this is very complex. It requires us to hold in our hearts simultaneously at the same time advocacy of justice with unconditional love and forgiveness. And for many of us, those are hard emotions to have in the same place at the same time. But that is what we're asked to do. So the importance of standing up to oppression is unequivocal in the Baha'i faith. The significance of justice is very important. We're told that we must stay the hand of the oppressor if we fail to safeguard the rights of the downtrodden. What right have ye then to vaunt yourself among men? So we are supposed to tell the rich of the midnight sighing of the poor. You know, to me, this is about advocating for and helping raise awareness about the suffering of other people. We know that if criminals were entirely forgiven, the order of the world would be upset. So punishment is one of the essential necessities for the safety of communities. But he who is oppressed by a transgressor has not the right to take vengeance. On the contrary, he should forgive and pardon, for this is worthy of the world of man. So we're going to continue to talk about this difference between society and the individual. Okay, so forgiveness, there are maybe literally a gazillion writings on forgiveness and unconditional love. And I've only pulled out a few, but there are so many. The bar is actually super, super high for unconditional love and forgiveness. These are a few of my personal favorites, but these are not the only ones out there. But we're told that if a person falls into error for 100,000 times, he may yet turn his face to you, hopeful that you will forgive him. For he must not become hopeless, neither grieved nor despondent. I shared this quote at Tahirih with some staff, and one of them very seriously said, so do you keep a tick list? Like, are you counting the 100,000? I was like, I'm not, but I don't know, it's not a bad idea. But I think, in all seriousness, a lot of people, and I think very unfortunately, we have a culture that a lot of self-help people and other individuals are really perpetuating the antithesis view of this, which is, if somebody's wronged you, I don't know, 5 times, let's say, they deserve to be cut off. They deserve to have no more chances. They deserve, and there's this very low bar tolerance right now culturally in the world for, that is in stark contrast to 100,000 times. And so it's something that we should really think about. And we also bring our own cultural lens, our own family history, our own societal history that makes us feel entitled under the guise of boundaries sometimes, under the guise of self-righteousness, to engage in what is really a retaliatory behavior, a behavior that doesn't help ultimately with unity in the world. And it's a bit of a disease, I think, that's happening in the world right now, but something we have to be very critical about. We must look upon our enemies with a sin-covering eye and act with justice when confronted with injustice with any, these are very unequivocal terms, with any injustice whatsoever. Forgive all. Consider the whole of humanity as our own family, the whole earth as our own country. Wherefore must the loved ones of God associate in affectionate fellowship with stranger and friend alike, showing forth to all the utmost loving kindness, disregarding the degree of their capacity, never asking whether they deserve to be loved. And this is something we do often. We put a lot of conditions on, like, I'm only going to forgive if you, I don't know, apologize, or if you do this, or if you do that, or you don't deserve to be loved because of something you've done to me, or, whatever it may be. But disregarding their degree of capacity, never asking whether they deserve to be loved. In every instance, let the friends be considerate and infinitely kind. Let them never be defeated by the malice of the people, by their aggression, their hate, no matter how intense. If others hurl their darts at you, against you, offer them milk and honey in return. If they poison your lives, sweeten their souls. If they injure you, it's very specific. These aren't platitudes. It's very specific. If they injure you, teach them how to be comforted. If they inflict a wound upon you, be a balm to their sores. If they sting you, hold to their lips a refreshing cup. And then finally, should other peoples and nations be unfaithful to you, show your fidelity unto them. Should they be unjust towards you, show justice towards them. Should they keep aloof from you, attract them to yourselves. Should they allow their enmity be friendly towards them. Should they poison your lives, sweeten their souls. Should they inflict a wound upon you, be a salve to their sores. Such are the attributes of the sincere and the faithful. So it's this incredibly, incredibly high bar that most of us have a hard time achieving because of our own weaknesses, also because of the society that we're living in and what messages we might be getting. I'm going to make an assumption right now that a good proportion of people are Baha'is. There is a quote out there that is, I think, one of the most misused, abused quotes ever. And I'm going to go ahead and mention it so that nobody feels like they have to let me know about it as if I didn't know. There's a quote that basically talks about a liar, a tyrant, and a thief. And what I want to make really clear is that those are criminal designations. The liar, the tyrant, and the thief. Not someone who annoys you, not someone who's offended you, not someone who's lied once or twice, but those are criminal, those are labels. Those are actually criminal designations. And there is a whole chapter in Some Answered Questions that tells us what, because that quote says, exception to kindness. We're actually told what an exception to kindness with injustice looks like. We're told what those behaviors are. I think some people might say, well, I don't have to be kind, so I can be anything. I can do anything in response. That's actually not true. There are specific behaviors that are kind of allowed as the exception to kindness to address injustice. So it's not like a license to do anything. So we're going to talk about what those exceptions to kindness might look like. So the next, okay, so this is where Abdu'l-Baha breaks it down in very concrete terms, how these concepts of justice and forgiveness work together. It's a very long chapter, and so I have skipped and kind of pasted together, but I encourage anyone who's interested to go ahead and read the whole chapter in its entirety. And there's a name that it's very long and I've taken it out. But if someone oppresses, injures, and wrongs another, the wronged man retaliates. This is vengeance and is censurable. No, rather he must return good for evil and not only forgive, but also, if possible, be of service to his oppressor. Okay. I don't have any friends who ever say, try to be of service to your oppressor as they're giving me advice on how to deal with difficult situations, or any therapists or anybody like that. This is a very different standard. This is a very difficult standard, but again, one that is not unique to the Baha'i faith, one that is in Christianity. It's definitely in Buddhism. It's also in Hinduism, but this idea of returning honey for poison. But the community has the right of defense and of self-protection. Moreover, the community has no hatred nor animosity for the murderer. It imprisons or punishes him merely for the protection and security of others, not for the punishment, not for the purpose of taking vengeance upon the murderer, but for the purpose of inflicting a punishment by which the community will be protected. So there's a collective interest in justice. It's not about personal satisfaction, what I'm owed, deserved, need to hear, need to get back personally. It's about a collective obligation and responsibility for the community for justice. As forgiveness is one of the attributes of the merciful one, so also justice is one of the attributes of the Lord. The tent of existence is upheld upon the pillar of justice and not forgiveness. This is how important justice is to society. Society will collapse if there isn't justice. Many of us are seeing this in our countries and our societies and in the world today. Abdu'l-Baha makes it very unequivocal, the importance of justice. The continuance of mankind, this is very dire, this is very bleak. The continuance of mankind depends on justice, not forgiveness. He puts them against each other. He pits them, he compares them, and makes it very, very clear. To recapitulate, the constitution of the communities depends on justice, not upon forgiveness. He had to repeat it 4 times in this one chapter if we were unclear about it. But the communities must protect the rights of man. So if someone assaults, injures, oppresses, and wounds me, I will offer no resistance, and I will forgive him. But if a person wishes to assault you, certainly I will prevent him. Although for the malefactor, non-interference is apparently a kindness, it would be an oppression to you. If at this moment, so-and-so were to enter this place with a drawn sword, wishing to assault, wound, and kill you, if so-and-so wishes to assault, wound, and kill you, most assuredly I would prevent him. For if I abandon you to him, that would not be justice, but injustice. But if he injure me personally, I would forgive him. Okay, so this paradigm, which is made very clear, Abdu'l-Baha lays out a scenario. Most of our communities have a cultural obstacle to implementing this. And the cultural obstacle has to do with honor and shame. So most European, particularly Northern European, a lot of British influenced cultures have a stiff upper lip cultural value. And the value is that you don't complain. The value is that you don't reveal your weaknesses or the problems that you're having. And that if somebody else sees it in you, it's a source of shame because you weren't hiding it well enough. So there's kind of like an identification of it, that's a source of shame, and revealing it, needing help, asking for help. You know, American culture is very British dominated, and there is a culture of shame when you need help. People are looked down on who need help. This is also culturally very true for people in the Middle East and in Asia. So it's an honor, a lot of cultures that have shame or honor as a part of that have a culture of hide the bad stuff, pretend it's not there, don't talk about it. And if somebody else notices it, it's even worse because then it's like, you know, they've noticed this imperfection in you, and it's a really embarrassing thing. That is, and then also on the flip end, forgiveness culturally is very, very hard. Forgiveness is hard when you don't talk openly about stuff. And when you have a cultural obstacle to talking openly about stuff, it makes that process of acknowledgement, which is a part of forgiveness usually. It can be unconditional, but often that's an important part of the process. It makes that journey very, very difficult. And similarly, some of our cultures are just like kind of Olympiad level at resentment and holding grudge. Like there are some cultures that are so good at that. And, you know, and I can own, part of my own cultural background is Jewish. The amount of like grudge holding that can exist through multiple generations is kind of legendary. It's also true in the Middle East. It's well studied by social scientists that it's made a lot of Middle East peace talks and other things incredibly difficult. But it is not necessary. It is actually contrary, I think, to the Baha'i perspective on this, which has a very high bar for forgiveness, low bar for preconditions to the forgiveness, and a very high bar for allyship, advocacy, and intervention. A high bar that does require us to see when someone else is suffering, that does require us to see and be compassionate with others who express their suffering and their hurt and their need for help. But this is kind of against the grain of our culture. I will want to say, and because I'm saying our culture, and I'm saying that as a white person, as a Western person, but it is not true for all cultures. And I think we have a lot to learn, frankly, from some other cultures on this. There are Baha'i quotations that talk about Black people being the pupil of the eye. And Abdu'l-Baha talks about their wisdom and perspective as the light, you know, the pupil of the eye is the portal through which light is shown. And he talks very specifically about their wisdom shedding light on the world. This issue of forgiveness unconditionally and justice is something that I would really encourage. I mean, well, Martin Luther King, for example, was a master at these concepts. Women in Rwanda are worth studying. Anyone, and they have not gotten enough attention with regard to their degree of justice and forgiveness that has rebuilt that country to the point to which it's no longer on the poverty list for the World Bank. Like, it's amazing what they have done to rebuild, and they let go of hatred and they let go of resentment, but they also had mechanisms for truth and reconciliation and justice. So there's a lot to learn. We don't have to be stuck in a place of resentment and grudge holding and then, you know, not knowing how to intervene and apply justice. There are other communities that have actually gotten quite good at it that we could all really learn from. But we have to self-identify and recognize our own obstacles, our own cultural kind of inhibitions to applying this. And I think it's also important when we're inclined to read self-help books or forward memes that confirm our anger and our frustration, that we pause and say, is that actually aligned with values, or just does it make me feel better to like kind of vent or to be able to post or something like that? Because this is a very high bar for forgiveness as well as justice. It also requires intervention on a level, you know, Abdu'l-Baha talks about somebody entering a room with a sword. A lot of people, when that might happen, would leave the room, like not stay and defend, but would leave, maybe run, flee as fast as they could from that room. And what we're told is the opposite. If we see an injustice, we need to step up, we need to step in, and we need to intervene. So these are very, very complex concepts. I think there are only a couple more slides and then we'll stop for discussion. Okay, so this is a visual, and there's nothing holy about this visual. It's just something I put together to try to figure out how to reconcile these concepts, because so if that line, the diagonal line, is the arc of the process of justice, we know that it is the pillar that upholds the tent of society. We know that the end goal is unity, but at the beginning of that is oppression, some form of injustice. What is the role of the individual, which is on top of the line? What are some of the actions and roles of society or community, which is on the bottom of the line? And so this is a super imperfect effort to maybe track some of the stages. One thing that's very important, I think, to acknowledge, and this tries to show this, is that the first stages, maybe even the majority of the stages of the journey towards justice, don't look like unity. They actually look like not unity, because in the very beginning, what you're doing is you're speaking your truth. It takes a lot of courage. You're raising the fact that you've been wronged. You're raising the fact that there's been violence against you. You're standing up and you're speaking up. And then there might be differing views on that. There's going to be somebody else who was in the room at the same time who's going to say, actually, I saw that differently. There's a truth finding process. So in the very beginning, there's the courage to speak up. That's the first step. Or the courage to notice. So this is the role of the community, the role of the individual. If it happened to you, it's about speaking up. If it happened to somebody else, it's about noticing and elevating, amplifying, telling the rich of the midnight sighing of the poor, intervening and serving as an ally. But two roles. And then kind of the next step has to do with fact finding, truth finding. There may be witnesses in a court process. There are going to be different perspectives on what really happened and how it went down. That's a very hard thing to endure. But the victim has to be in that process. They have to offer their perspective. They have to be a witness, and then community has to make sure they're protected, their dignity is maintained, and that the process in fact results in then a decision of facts. That decision is then named. People who are victims can choose to accept that or appeal it. And this is, part of the process. You can live in a little vortex of appealing and you can sit there for a really long time. The next step then is to determine consequences. So once you've figured out the facts, then you talk about consequences. There's usually a whole nother discovery process on figuring out the right consequence, because the consequence has to be proportional to the crime. And so there's a proportionality discovery process around justice, what that should be. Then there's a decision on consequence, punishment. Then there's the implementation. Those are two separate things. And I can tell you from experience, we litigated a case one time. It took 3 years to litigate. It was the first case in the United States against a quote unquote mail order bride agency. We had a 2-week federal jury trial. It ultimately resulted in $500,000 of punitive damages for our client. So facts were found, decision on consequence and punishment was made, and we were never able to implement it. And we were never able to get the money for her. It's a long story, why not? They claim bankruptcy, all kinds of things. So these are all, and it's long, justice is long, and it's messy, and it's yucky, and it doesn't feel like love, and it doesn't feel like unity, and there's this whole process. But then at some point, there is this release of fear. If you're lucky, you'll get justice. And I say if you're lucky, because we know we live in such imperfect societies and systems. And then it makes it easier to have understanding, maybe what was going on for that other person. It allows for empathy, it allows for forgiveness, ultimate reconciliation, unconditional love, and unity. But we're not done with the process until we achieve the unity. The punishment isn't the end goal, the unity is the end goal. So this is just a graphic that tries to illustrate that journey. So internally at Tahirih, and also maybe in our worlds, there's a perpetual question. When am I promoting justice and when am I backbiting? And this is something that a lot of people really grapple with. What we've decided at Tahirih, and this is just, again, an imperfect attempt to apply Baha'i principles, so this is not holy. But what we've decided is we've given staff guidance that has to do with intent and expression to help guide whether it's backbiting or whether it's the promotion of justice. So feedback or criticism would not be considered backbiting if the intention is for growth and improvement. If your intention is just to vent or to somehow satisfy an emotional need that you have, that might be backbiting. But if your intent is for growth and improvement, and ultimately for the betterment of society. So you remember this definition of justice has to do with the community's interests, not yours personally. So if the intent is for the betterment of our community, then this is really important feedback and criticism to be giving. The second has to do to whom you give it. So the intent and then to whom you give it. If it is expressed to the person or the institution who can do something about it, then it's very appropriate feedback to give and opportunity for growth. And so obviously somebody who can do something about it would be the person directly. Talking to the person directly is kind of the number one preference. Talking in a work environment to the HR person, to your manager. These are people who positionally their job is actually to deal with concerns, deal with complaints. In society, it might be police officer, it might be a judge, it might be a high school guidance counselor. There are people whose jobs are to receive feedback, to help with injustices, that kind of thing. In a Baha'i community, it might be a local spiritual assembly and auxiliary board member. So somebody who positionally their job is actually to receive criticism, to receive feedback so that something in fact can be done about it. So long as our criticism is within that framework, it's absolutely not backbiting. It's needed and necessary, in fact, and helpful to our growth and important to the implementation of justice. But if it's not to somebody who can do something about it, and you actually don't want to solve the problem, you just want to vent about it, that might give you a clue that it falls into that sphere of backbiting. So this is just one way that we've tried to train staff around the difference between backbiting and that kind of thing. And then finally, and I added this yesterday after a conversation that we had, let's acknowledge up front that you are lucky if you actually get justice. Like the vast majority of us probably won't. We will be wronged and never righted. We will have things happen to us that aren't resolved. That is the harsh reality of the world that we live in. And one possible source of compassionate relief to that is the knowledge that this world, this earthly and material plane, is really just one sphere in which justice can happen. And if it doesn't, there are other worlds in which justice can happen. And this is taken from, there's a tablet that it's a provisional translation. There are actually 3 different translations. It's called the Tablet of the Rights of the People. And it lays out this incredible justice framework, which basically says, and they use Baha'u'llah uses an analogy that says, if I steal a seed from you, you forgive me unconditionally. Like if you're following, these guidance to the perfection, you immediately are like, I don't need the seed. I've forgiven you unconditionally. I don't mind that you took the seed from me, whatever. You've completely unconditionally forgiven me. However, I must repay you the seed, not because you're asking for it or you feel entitled or it'll give you emotional satisfaction, but because it is the right of the people. It's the entitlement of the community that I repay you that seed. And if I don't, my punishment, if I don't do that in this life, my punishment in the next life will not just be that seed, but will be the tree from that seed, its leaves, its branches, its fruits, and the seeds of those fruits. So it's this like analogy around the multiplier punishment that waits for us in the next world if we don't experience justice here. So for those of us who have experienced injustice that we won't likely see justice for in this world, again, hopefully not in a spirit of vengeance, but maybe it gives some compassion to know that there will be consequences in the next life that don't depend on our immature, imperfect institutions and humans that exist in this life.
But I really loved your presentation and the messages through it. And I've also listened to the TED Talk and fantastic. I guess what I'm really interested in is how do you, I guess, convey hope to people that don't have that faith or don't have the writings that you have? How do you, because I guess majority of people that you're interacting with in the justice sector don't come from a Baha'i faith. And how do you guess portray that hope for them, and of course for the victims and the oppressors, etc.? Yeah, I don't know if I've articulated that well, but
yeah, no, perfectly. I think there is a different answer when it comes to Tahirih's clients versus like staff or other social justice advocates. So when it comes to Tahirih's clients, they give me hope. Like the real reality is that, you know, it's funny. I think that forgiveness, this idea of forgiveness, is like a muscle. For those who've experienced a lot of oppression, it's a well-oiled, like Herculean muscle that they've developed around forgiveness. And I actually find that it's people with a lot of privilege or people who haven't had to work out that muscle so much, essentially, who have a harder time grasping concepts of unconditional love and forgiveness. People who've experienced a lot of pain and a lot of oppression are actually really good at that. And they have incredible, like, they have, I don't know, they inspire me. I mean, they come into the office and they have been gang raped and they have been tortured and they have been mutilated and they have been so wronged on so many levels by so many people, structurally and individually. And many of them are religious. I mean, 99% of Tahirih's clients are deep in their faith. It is what gives them hope. It gives them, you know, many of them are Muslim, Christian, they have lots of different backgrounds, Hindu. But they are the experts in hope, like far beyond what I could as a Baha'i who's trying to read these quotations and understand them. So they've got it down, actually, and they're the ones who regularly inspire us. Now, social justice advocates are pretty cynical people, like by nature, and I do think that's harder. I do, and it is the long view that Baha'is have. We have a paradigm in the Baha'i faith that calls us to really be grateful for tests. We see tests as opportunities for growth and for learning. Again, I don't, you know, some people here might be better at this than I am, but I have to do a lot of work. I have to do a lot of meditative work when I'm faced with a test to shift my thinking from really, why me? You know, is this really happening? To thank you, I am so grateful. This is an opportunity for growth. That's a really hard thing to do, but that's what we're called to do in the Baha'i faith. So when at the Tahirih Justice Center, we do have a lot of social justice advocates, some of whom are really swimming in despair. And right now, as a lawyer in the United States working on these issues, it is a depressing time. And what we do, and we have a lot of self-care things, we do different things on staff to try to help people, is we try to encourage people to see the blessings in this. So the Baha'i faith also has a paradigm that relates to the destruction of humanity, essentially. It has to do with the disintegration and integration process. And the idea is basically that systems that don't work, that need to die, are gonna crumble. They're gonna implode on themselves. Meanwhile, a new way of doing things based on spiritual principles will gradually emerge and be rebuilt. But it's really hard to build them when these other structures continue to dominate. So for example, at Tahirih, we talk a lot about, you know, how horrible it is that this law that we were relying on to protect our clients has now been eviscerated. However, this is a wonderful opportunity to build the law from the ground up in a way that it will be stronger than it was before. So like there are rebirth and rebuilding opportunities, even in the destruction, and that can also give hope. So I would say it's those perspectives of tests and how there can be silver lining to tests, and this larger societal process of disintegration and integration that gives us hope, even while we're being faced with a whole lot of horrible stuff. Any other comments, questions? Dorothy.
Yes. So on a personal level of justice, I think you know that I spent 4 years doing a lot of research and writing a book about the murder of my uncle, and solved the case because it was bungled for a lot of reasons. And the police agreed with me now, 40 years later, that, but I struggled during this whole process of where's forgiveness? Where's justice? What am I? And I can't, I mean, I remember when the book came out, Wendy Moman was visiting me, and she said, Dorothy, you've spent 4 years searching for truth and justice, which is what I did. But I had a very prominent Baha'i accuse me of backbiting after she read my book. So what's, I know I'm not the only person that's been in a situation like this, but what's your thought on that?
So I don't, okay, first, I don't know. Like, I don't really know. I'm guessing based on my own inadequate understanding of the writings. But again, I go back to that framework where if it is, like, I think your book was an appropriate outlet in order to raise awareness so that community could learn, and in order to discern the truth for action. Now, I know, I think in your book, there were people who actually had passed, so maybe there isn't really an opportunity now for justice. But in the grand sense of things, you know, there is that opportunity. To be really frank though, when it comes to, like, I'll say lesser forms of injustice, murder is a pretty big one. Yeah. I was actually asking, so somebody has approached me about some, like, I don't know, biography type book, and another Baha'i was writing it, and I was like, I don't think we can, like, because I think there's too much that would be too, might be backbiting. I don't know. I honestly, Dorothy, I have thought of writing the House of Justice on this, because I think from a, like, writing biography, particularly, you were writing about somebody else, so in a way there's some just, you know, but particularly people are writing biographies about stuff they have faced. It might be backfire. I don't know. I'd love to know the answer to that, particularly when it comes to publication of books.
When you're discussing it on the level of the individual, I can somehow relate to it and try to understand it and try to apply it. Of course, the high bar is there. But you made one statement that just jumped out at me. Maybe it's something from my own background, but societies will collapse if there is no justice. And so that jumps out at me because, well, gee, when I look at society, I don't see any justice. And so that means they're going to collapse. So if we apply the individual, you know, let's say justice rules, so to speak, to love and to forgive, to societies that are experiencing injustice, it's just like, okay, fine, it's unjust. Okay, let's just wait it out and see what comes next. I don't think that's the way it works for me anyway. And I have seen things in Baha'i writings. I mean, there's a lot of Baha'is that think that, you know, getting directly involved with certain activism is not Baha'i, which there are writings that suggest otherwise. And so when we see justice in society, I can't sit still, quite frankly. And, you know, and of course, I don't want to run out and shoot anybody, but I do want to do something about it, not just sit back and say, well, gee, you know, and I think that we as Baha'is would be criticized when we sit back and don't do anything in the face of societal injustice. Oh, those Baha'is, they just sit there and they don't do anything. That would be a very bad criticism. And in fact, again, there's a quote from Shoghi Effendi that says something along those lines. Is there a relationship? I mean, can we deal with societal injustice in some way other than individual? I mean, it seems to be two different paradigms.
So the complexity that I see in the Baha'i concept of justice is that we're actually required to intervene. So again, going back to the analogy of Abdul Baha, where somebody next to him is being attacked with somebody as a sword. I am a bystander if you're next to me, or if I learn about your story on TV. I mean, if I am a part of community, I have an obligation to intervene, advocate, and push for justice. So I may be missing something in why you're feeling hampered by that, other than a misunderstanding about nonpartisanship, which you know, the House of Justice has written multiple letters to clarify that Baha'is must be involved in the development of policy. We should be involved in the promotion of justice. And there are lots of parameters and lots of guidance that they've given to that to help us stay nonpartisan in that. So to me, that's super clear. And then also this concept of justice, in fact, requires us, it's this higher bar of allyship, advocacy, and intervention that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. Look, it's way easier to duck out of advocating for something you're not personally affected by. That's easier, but that's the opposite of what we're supposed to do. Where, again, my understanding of this concept is that where we have to unconditionally forgive is only where we are personally the victim. So again, I'll go back to Martin Luther King, who I think was really the perfect example of this. You know, no one would ever accuse him of not being a social justice advocate. Like nobody would ever accuse him of not engaging in injustice and trying to stand up against oppression. That's who he was. But when he was face to face with police beating him, he didn't defend himself. He was completely vulnerable. When he was interacting with Governor Wallace, who was the Alabama governor that was personally responsible for his torture, his imprisonment, and his suffering, he met with him and unconditionally forgave him. Talked to him at his bedside when he was at the hospital. You may know the story. I mean, he unconditionally forgave this governor who didn't even ask for forgiveness. Like, it wasn't even clear that he understood how racist he was and how horrible he was. And Martin Luther King unconditionally gave that to him. And then Governor Wallace kind of later repented, and as you may know, left all of his money to anti-racism causes, and his daughter to this day is now a huge anti-racism advocate. So these emotions, actions of justice and forgiveness can live at the same time, in the same place, in the same person. It's just hard. But I don't see it as a binary. Because we forgive something that happens to us, we decide that no injustice is worth addressing. I actually think the opposite is true in the writings. We have a higher bar of allyship, intervention, and advocacy than most of our cultural norms are comfortable with. Any other thoughts? Stephanie?
And now you're touching on the uncomfortable part of intervention. And I really feel I have super weak muscles into this intervention advocacy. And I was wondering if you have some idea of where to start, how to build those muscles.
Yeah, I love the analogy you said of muscles, because it's a muscle. We get, you know, like with every muscle, like we're trying to work it and then we don't work it right and it gets sore and we pull a muscle, and, you know, so there's this learning process too with trying to figure that out. I would say that as we enter the arena of intervention, allyship, advocacy, there's a huge amount of humility that one has to have. Know that you will get it wrong. Know that you will mess up, and be open to feedback. But there are a few tips and tricks. One has to do with listening to the person most affected. So again, Tahirih clients, they define justice for themselves. They tell us what they need. We work for them. We may have different views of justice, and it regularly happens with our clients. Somebody came to us seeking protection for their daughters from female genital mutilation, but we noticed that she had bruises on her face. We asked her what was happening. She was being beaten by her husband. We explained to her that in the United States that is not allowed and that we can help her get justice. She very quickly said to us that she believes she deserved it, that she believes she should be subservient to her husband, but she doesn't want her daughters mutilated. we should be focused on that. And that's, we can't judge, everyone is on their journey of feminism or their journey of empowerment. And it is not for us to judge that. We are there for her.
Sorry.
So, you know, it's our job to help people, but the person most afflicted, the most affected has to own the definition of what that justice. Otherwise, it can actually become a patronizing or even harmful interaction. So one of the other, so humility is really important. Proximity is the other really, really important element. This is something that other social justice advocates, it's a term I didn't coin, it's a term that was coined in the African-American civil justice movement. But the idea is that one of the first steps to allyship or advocacy is proximity. Increase proximity. That's physical, it's relational. These are authentic friendships, authentic love. Don't claim to understand what somebody wants or what somebody has endured unless you have that authentic or close proximity relationship. Darren Stevenson, who's just an incredible, he wrote a book called Just Mercy, which was made into a movie, but he does amazing work. This is his term, it's increasing proximity. So at a tactical level, increasing proximity might mean even going to sit with somebody. The Anti-Defamation League has on their website, they have a step-by-step guide on how to intervene with religious hate that you might see publicly. The first step is increasing proximity. You see somebody who's being called a racist because they're wearing hijab, somebody is yelling at them. The first step is to simply walk next to them, stand next to them, smile at them, have them engage with you and let them know that you are there and you're friendly. That's the first step, increasing proximity. And then, you know, it gives other steps. Similarly, in a Baha'i community, somebody reached out to me and said that there was a woman that they worried was suffering domestic violence, but she was very aloof, kept herself distant from everybody, and nobody felt really close or intimate with her. And I suggested a few tactics, but they were all around increasing proximity. Also, her husband would follow her from room to room, and it was hard for her to have a conversation separate from him. So this person claimed to have a female issue, went into the bathroom and said, "Can you help me with this female issue?" Got her into the bathroom and in her own language just said, "I just want to let you know that I care about you. I'm a little worried that you're not okay and want to let you know that I am here for you for anything you need." It's just close proximity, you know, helping to increase that. Not surprisingly, the first response of this person was shame and embarrassment. Because in her mind, she's thinking, I thought I was hiding it. That's what her, you know, what she was thinking. And I have a cultural background that gives me great shame and embarrassment if somebody's noticed that I'm not perfect and that, you know, something is wrong. And so her first reaction was to kind of distance herself. And this person called me all upset. And I said, "Don't worry about it. That's a totally normal, totally natural first response. Continue with the proximity. Continue to connect, continue to bond." Anyway, that case ended up becoming, according to a prosecutor who ended up prosecuting that case, the worst case of sexual violence and abuse they had ever experienced in their 30 years. This case ultimately went to trial. It was because of the intervention of that community member, the fact that they noticed, the fact that they said, "I see you and I am here for you. I'm not going to usurp your agency. I'm not going to take away your power. I'm not going to judge you. But I'm going to walk with you and I'm going to stand next to you. And even if you get mad at me or embarrassed, I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here. And you can come back to me whenever you need me, whenever you're ready." And that person got ready and they filed a complaint, and it resulted in that person got 7 years in jail. So I think, you know, these are some of the little small things that we can do in order to intervene and step up. But just know, you're not going to get appreciation. You're not going to be thanked. You're not even going to be understood. You may be told that you did it wrong. Know that, and know that your intervention and your advocacy for justice is a selfless act, not for your own benefit, not for your recognition, not for any of that. It's for the benefit of community. And that's why we have to intervene and step up. Any other thoughts, questions?
So we should pray for justice in this life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There was another case that I had involvement with that dealt with somebody who had pedophilia, and they ended up spending I don't know, 8 years, something like that, in jail. Came out, re-engaged in the high community, and you know, and he had boundaries. But it's important we love unconditionally and we do forgive as individuals. It's not our job to treat someone with disdain or resentment or whatever. It's the job of, you know, the institutions to punish without that emotion. But there were also boundaries, only allowed to be in the living room, you know, had certain boundaries. But we were talking, I was like, how are you? You know, it's so good to see you. And he was so happy and he was so radiant. And he's like, I'm doing so good because I am so grateful to have experienced justice in this life. Like, he actually really got it. Like, there was a definite sense of, you know, so grateful, and I'm trying so hard, and I'm a part of this group and that group, and I've got this therapist, and I've got these boundaries for myself, and, you know, and that's a beautiful thing. I mean, you know, the goal of this life is not to be perfect, because we can't be, we never will be, but all we can hope for is to grow and to learn and improve, receive justice, get criticism, get feedback, process that in a way that allows us to grow. This is all about spiritual growth in this world and developing spiritual qualities. It's not about like perfect baked throughout this life, you know? So I think, yeah, it's an interesting process that so many are in, and it can be injustice with a big I or little injustices, whichever it may be. We're all on that journey. Yeah. Emily or Martina, I'm not sure.
This Martina. Thank you for this overwhelming amount of love and hope. I really appreciate. Certain points you have mentioned the fact that justice is not everybody's job, as the burden of justice has to be on society. I wonder if you could give me a practical example of that.
Sure. So to be clear, we are society. Each person here is, right? And I think that's kind of, you know, a lot of times we think, oh, there's this anonymous, amorphous, somebody else will handle this. And I think that that's a danger, because we are all society, we are all community. The job is on all of us. Again, going back to that example from Abdu'l-Baha, it wasn't that he was a police officer or a member of an assembly, or he had no official, he's talking about being next to somebody who was experiencing somebody coming at them with a sword, right? So we become community, society, the minute we're bystanders. The distinction is when it's at us, when we're the victim, as opposed to when we're observing somebody else. So it's like very different behaviors expected. Again, going back to that chapter, Abdu'l-Baha said very clearly, if you come at me with a sword, I will not defend myself, and I will forgive you immediately. And earlier, he talks about being of service to his oppressors. Again, if you read his experience after the passing of Baha'u'llah, there was an incredible injustice that he faced, not only by the mayor, the governor, the Ottoman Empire, but also his own family and his own brothers. And it's amazing to kind of listen tactically to how he was of service to his oppressors. He literally fed the armies of the government that was oppressing him. He literally gave money to support his half-brothers who were trying to poison him, like kind of unbelievable levels that flies in the face of any advice any therapist would give anyone today. You know, it's just completely, but this was the example of his behavior. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not claiming to totally get that right or completely understand it, but that's the standard that we're held to. And you know, again, Martin Luther King also, in a more recent model of that, was an incredible example. Malala, by the way, has also written a lot about the forgiveness of the people who shot her, of the Taliban, all of these things. There are amazing souls of many religious backgrounds who have developed that spiritual muscle, that quality of personal, when you're the victim, forgiveness and unconditional love, and simultaneous advocacy for justice, and doing it at the same time, not thinking it has to be all or nothing or either or.
And I think yesterday you gave this example also of, I don't know if it was a friend of yours, right? There was, they decided not to press charge, and that you really explained that that's not what we are called to be doing, right? Because it is our duty to, if there was a wrong that was done, to actually advocate, to protect the community. So it's not for the personal justice that I'm claiming for myself, but really in service of the community to prevent this to be. Maybe you can elaborate, just share it again, because I think that there was an example that really gave a quite understanding of these two different dimensions, right? And
yeah. So this individual was mugged, and really violently, and had to be in the hospital as a result. It was a very violent mugging. She held on to her purse, by the way, though. He didn't get it, even after like this really violent interaction that landed her in the hospital. So she's quite a fighter. But she had post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of it. She had physical scars, emotional scars. She really, really, really suffered. And I just kind of followed up with her and said, how are you doing? And she said, you know, I'm really good, actually. I'm more at peace. I have reconciled what happened to me. I feel like the, you know, PTSD has kind of left my brain, and I'm really in a place of forgiveness and compassion and empathy for that person. She learned more about this person's personal life and addictions and difficulties. And she said, you know, I'm in a really good place of forgiveness and empathy. And I was like, that's, you know, so wonderful. And so how's the criminal prosecution advancing? And she says, oh yeah, the prosecutor called me and I didn't call them back because I've forgiven him. And I was like, wait, that's not the point, because it's good that you have forgiven, and it's a selfless obligation. So again, it's not for your selfish need. It's not because you need justice. Maybe you don't. You're totally fine with what happened and you don't even need justice. It's about protecting community. It's about protecting society. It's a really complex concept. We really don't. It's so hard to have these. It's like rubbing your head and your belly and patting your head or something at the same time. You know, it's really hard to have forgiveness and to have justice being pursued all at the same time, because for many of us, we actually don't pursue justice unless we're angry. Like, it is what fuels the pursuit of justice. But that's not how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to forgive, let go. It's not about vengeance. It's not about anger, but it is about protecting society. It's also probably about the spiritual growth of that person, who again should face justice in this life rather than in the next life. So, you know, anyway, we were kind of talking about, like, that's not what it means. I don't think this is what it means. You do need to testify, because if you're not a witness, this person isn't going to receive justice. They need you as a witness. So again, we have to, it's complexity. It's a non-binary, non-all or nothing, non-meme worthy concept that we're not good at. It's really, really hard for us. But this is the challenge of the new paradigm that we're supposed to adopt.
thank you very much.